if you think about a situation, $1 million of revenue, 25% margin, that only leaves me $50,000 after I cover my $200,000 of overheads. Now, let's just say I make some minor changes to take my margin from 25% and just increase it by 5%, bump it up to 30%. So from 30 or from 25 to 30% margin, what happens to profit? It literally doubles.
Welcome to GraceCast, a show where the top tactics for selling direct to consumer are expanded to get results for perishable food suppliers. If you're in the fresh and frozen categories and you're looking for the latest insights on e-commerce, marketing, and business, subscribe and stay tuned. All right, Blaine, are you ready to hear the quote I picked out for this episode?
Yes, I am. It's a surprise for me today.
All right, a great business at a fair price is superior to a fair business at a great price.
So explain that.
So it's just talking about the value that a business provides to you and separating that from the price that you pay.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Which today's profit lever we're talking about is margin. So if there's any way you're ever going to increase your margin or price, you have to increase perceived value and real value, because perceived value is real value.
Correct. So to back up, if you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you know that we're kind of on this series about profit. Okay. And Blaine's been leading us in some training on really the three different levers that you have to pull to create profit. And to give a quick summary, you're actually going to want to go back 2 episodes to get the full overview. But to give you a quick summary, those 3 ways, Blaine, we'll see if I can do this, are to increase your profit is to increase your gross product or your gross margin.
Yes.
So that's the difference between what it costs for you to produce something versus the price that you have on the retail end.
What's left when you sell that item.
So that gap.
Yeah.
The second thing you can do is you can reduce your overheads. So to figure out a way to reduce those overheads that it takes to continue to run and operate the business. So those are some of your more static operating expenses.
Right.
And then number 3 is to reduce or improve turnover or to scale. So to sell more of whatever that is that you produce.
Right. And we use the term turnover, which we'll do on another episode. We use that term because it doesn't confine us to this idea of just scale and growth. There's other ways to increase revenue coming in besides scale and growth.
Yep. So this will be a 4-episode series. We're spending each episode to dive into each one of those 3 different areas that you can use to increase profit. Last episode, we focused on 3 ways to slash overheads?
Yes.
So this is definitely not one of those episodes you just want to catch one, because all 3 of these work together to create your profit, so you need to spend time in every single area. Which lever are we focusing on today?
This is how to boost profit by increasing gross margin or gross product. I like the term gross product because it's more holistic when we think about the margin, or affecting the margin. And on the first episode, we talked about how to identify which profit lever we're talking about: decrease overheads, increase gross product, or increase turnover. And the reason we went over those 3 levers in the first episode was to help you identify which lever you should be working on, because it's too much work to try to address all of them at once. What you want to do is figure out which lever requires the minimum input for the biggest bang for your buck, right? Because this is not exactly the funnest part of running a business, but one of the most important part of the businesses.
Yep. So to start out here, can you explain a little bit into, we're using that term gross margin, but how do you exactly define gross margin? How's that something that I configure for my business? And how's that different than, another term I hear often, which is markup?
Oh, okay. Well, it's literally the difference between you have a sale price, and then you have your cost of goods to provide that product. So, take your sale price, subtract your cost of that item, and you're left with your margin. Now, to figure the margin percentage, I'm going to take that margin that's left and divide it by the price that I sold it for. Okay, not my cost. Okay.
Yep.
I'm going to divide it by the price I sold it for to get my margin, because that's really what I care about. If I have $100,000 in sales in a year, I want to know what percentage of that did I actually keep in margin. Now, in margin, we use to cover our overheads. Yep. Right. So that's what we use margin for.
And this commonly gets confused when you're talking about that margin percentage versus your markup percentage. 2 different things, commonly confused. between the two.
Yeah, a 40% markup is not as much as a 40% margin because you're taking a cost and marking it up by 40%. That doesn't net you a 40% margin, right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
do not confuse that. I know in early days in our business, we definitely had that confused, and it cost a lot of money in the long run.
Because at the end of the day, it's a much more consistent way to evaluate your pricing strategy against margin, to create that that margin that you end up using to cover your overheads.
Can I give an example, Brooks, of why this is so important?
Yep.
Now, if you are just starting off in business, the reason knowing your margin is important is because you want to make sure that you're setting a proper price expectation so that once you get some volume behind your business, some turnover, you don't have to make some major price corrections, which is not fun to do with customers. So getting your margin right from day one, it's not obviously your biggest profit driver, because from day one, if you start off with $100 in sales, who cares if it was a 50% margin or a 30% margin?
Yep.
Difference between $30 or $50, not a big deal. So that's when you're starting off, this isn't obviously going to be your biggest profit lever. But once you get some volume behind you, it can become one of the easiest profit levers to move. For example, if I'm running $1 million worth of food sales, and if I'm running a 25% margin, okay, not that great. Mm-hmm. And if my overheads are about 20% of my revenue. So in a scenario where I have $1 million in sales, if my overheads are 20% of my revenue, that means I have $200,000 of overheads to cover with my margin. So if you think about a scenario where you're 25% margin, we'll flash this up on the screen. Hopefully Brock can do this in post. Yep. Think about a situation, $1 million of revenue, 25% margin. That only leaves me $50,000 after I cover my $200,000 of overheads. Now, let's just say I make some minor changes to take my margin from 25% and just increase it by 5%, bump it up to 30%. So from 25 to 30% margin, what happens to profit? It literally doubles. All I had to do was move one lever, my margin lever, just 5%, and I increased my profit, end of the day profit, by double. Yep. So it doesn't take that much work to do that. So that's where when you get some volume, so you get up to 100,000, beyond up to $1 million, this becomes such a important lever to watch, which is why we have someone here in our business, Seven Sons, that's Brant's job, his sole performance indicator and goal, he has goals around each year, is margin. So maintaining it or improving it.
So even though this doesn't provide as much of an impact in those early days, if I'm in a startup phase, it's the thing that we see, and we made a mistake, but it's one of the most common mistakes that we see startups make is starting with too low of a retail price. Because when you're first starting out, everyone's looking for ways on, hey, how do I differentiate from the competition? And well, one of the easiest ways to do that is to think, well, I'm just going to be more efficient. I'm going to be priced better than the rest.
Yeah, I can be lower cost, and somehow I'll make it work in the long run.
And the reason why we come to that too is because we think that it's going to be the most impactful when it comes to the customer's buying decision. So we think it's going to lead to a lot of growth. But we found that that's not the case. And what that ends up doing is just sets you up for disaster long term when it comes to having to make those price adjustments down the road, because it's much more difficult to do the larger your customer base is.
Exactly. Yep. So can we get into a couple of the main tips or things that we see other businesses do, food businesses, when it comes to increasing gross product or margin?
Yep.
One of the reasons I like to call it gross product is because, again, you think that to increase my margin, I either have to decrease my cost or increase my price, and that gives me a difference. Well, that's not necessarily true. For us to utilize more of a beef carcass, for example, Brooks, we don't have to necessarily decrease our cost or increase our price to the customer. We can utilize more cuts. So let's say, for example, taking bones and turning it into a higher value product like broth. Mm-hmm. In a sense, we've created more value from one carcass without increasing our cost or price. We've just created more value for our customer from each carcass. So, creating more value from each carcass is a couple folks in our industry, Brooks, have done this incredibly well, would be U.S. Wellness Meats. So John and Johnny Woods, Will Harris, White Oak Pastures. I think Together Farms does some meal prep. Yep. So added convenience and able to add more value that way. So those are ways. Merchandising is another great way to do it, which is really kind of what we've been talking about. But I guess when I say merchandise, didn't we do a episode with Dr. Alan Williams on some of the unique specialty cuts that we've been saving?
Yeah, I think it's the 3 cuts that you're likely not saving. That was a really great episode.
Yep, exactly. So we've done things like bacon infused burger, gourmet ground beef, so just taking brisket and short rib, cuts that we haven't typically sold at a higher value, and just doing cool things with them.
Yep, and we're giving examples for, if you're in the meat business, meat industry, speaking from experience of where we're from, but this, increasing your yield, that applies to whether you're selling produce, vegetables.
Well, I mean, decreasing spoilage is increasing margin, because spoilage goes into cost of goods sold at the end of the day. You want to be more efficient with that.
Think about what's causing that waste. Is there something you can do with that waste to create more margin?
Exactly. Same thing. Even on the beef side, there's a lot of folks I know that tried doing a 3 to 4 week dry age. Talk about weight loss in that time period. Make sure you're getting a good premium for that, or else that's just cost. So that's one way, Brooks, increasing yield in whatever you're doing, or decreasing spoilage, for example, using merchandising, carcass utilization, things like that. So number 2, though, Brooks, is when it comes to lowering your cost of goods sold, obviously, what have the big guys done? They've outsourced their procurement. Like if you're in selling grass-fed beef, other folks have outsourced their procurement to overseas.
Yep.
That's not something that we necessarily recommend, and definitely are not doing. But there's other things that you can look at, Brooks. If you're sourcing from producers, it's always a good idea to be checking around and working with multiple producers, because what you will find is that some producers are just set up to be more efficient. And so you don't want to create a pricing standard on the mediocre or least efficient producer that you're working with, or smaller scale producer. You want to you kind of want to get a feel for working with multiple producers, and one way to do that, Brooks, that we do that at Seven Sons, is we just get closer to our producers we're working with. We provide coaching and training, and so we understand their business model, and the more profit that we can help them extract out of the production process, that's less that they necessarily have to have for the cost, the price to us, when they're being more efficient on their production side. So that's, believe it or not, coaching our producers has been a great way to keep our cost of goods sold in line and profit in place for our producers.
You got to spend money to make money. So we're, hiring folks like Dr. Alan Williams, I think was at our last producer event.
Yes, that's right.
So, we're paying consulting fees to have those folks come out, but that does translate back to us on the back end side of things.
Not only to our producers, but for us here on our farm, because we are a producer, we're seeing more efficiency on the production side of our business as well. So, and there's obvious things, Brooks, something that we're quoting. What are things that you and Brant quote every year when it comes to, incremental cost to get product out the door?
Well, honestly, we just analyze what are all of our input costs. So those things that are tied to basically every unit that is sold. So think about every pound of product that I sell. What are those input costs that are tied to that are pretty much static and kind of flow along with it? Common things we think about are shipping costs. So freight fees that we're paying the courier companies to do final mile deliveries. We ship a lot of product through FedEx. So we're quoting out that business at least once or twice a year. So we get with UPS, we get with third-party resellers, say, hey guys, here's what our volume looks like. Here's what our growth has looked like over time. Can we get sharper on this? And that keeps everybody honest. So shipping fees is definitely one. Same thing with packaging supplies. I mean, for one thing, we're always testing, the latest and newest packaging innovations that are on the market. And it's a great opportunity for us to get exposure to other vendors. And again, same thing. We're just looking at that growth. And two, if you're seeing a lot of growth, that's a great way to try to negotiate better pricing, is to give them insights into that and into what does it look like to have your account in the next 2 to 3 years if this growth rate continues, to try to leverage and lock in a better price now.
Yeah, because you can go to FedEx versus UPS and say, hey, this is my growth rate. This is what it looks like I'll do in a year's worth of volume moving forward. They'll as long as you're looking at two different parties at the same time, you got to give them motivation to be competitive.
Yep.
Okay, so Brooks, that was just lower input cost and lower cost of goods sold. I think in our minds, again, it's just being creative and thinking outside the box. It's just, I think a lot of times we think, well, I don't want to lower my quality or standards, so there's really nothing I can do to lower my cost of goods sold. Think creatively. Again, we've used coaching as one way with our producers.
Yep. What's number 3?
Increase. So this is the last one. Increase your average price that you sell your product for, and I use the term average for a reason. But before we even talk about increasing price, one thing you have to have clarified with crystal clear clarity in your mind is what margin you need to have as a business. And once you've went through the yield, increasing your yield, options for doing that, and options for lowering your cost of goods sold. At that point, I've done my due diligence on my business side. And if I'm still not hitting the margin, I need to be honest with my customers and confident with myself. And I need to increase some prices. And once you've done your due diligence in these other scenarios, you'll have that confidence. And once you've done your due diligence to know what my business margin really needs to be. If I'm going to stay in business, I'm not going to lose heart, lose motivation. And if I'm going to be able to hire the help that I need and pay them what I need, I know I have to have X percentage margin. So once you get clear on that, you can really have confidence to go in and start adjusting your prices and communicating that with confidence to your customers. Now, I say increase average price, Brooks, because I don't think we've ever done, if we've determined that our margin needs to increase by 5%, we've never done a flat across the board on every product that we sell and every cut, a flat price increase.
Yep.
We've always been strategic about it. So there's just some products that are going to be far more price sensitive than other products. Okay. So ground beef versus beef patties. Okay. People buy ground beef. It's a staple, more of a need to have item. Beef patties, that's a want to have item. Sausage links, sausage patties, breakfast patties, those types of things are convenience items. Those are items that people want. So those are items that, and steaks, for example, nobody has to eat a steak, right? So I know we've always been, quicker to increase our steak prices, especially if we'll look at the SKUs that we're having trouble keeping in stock. Those are going to have the more significant price increases. So just be strategic about any type of price increase.
Yep. And you got to have confidence with this. It can be one of those things that causes anxiety if you've had a very loyal customer base for a long time. And if you're looking for insights into how do I navigate through communicating through a price increase, we have a blog post that we wrote a while back on how to retain customers through a price increase, just some strategies and tips that we've learned over the years. We've even given some examples in that post of our exact email copy for any time we've had to make a significant enough price increase that it justified, letting our customers know about it in advance and ahead of time. So we'll leave a link to that.
Maybe we can do an episode on that. That's probably worth doing an episode, just
Yeah.
walking through the details on that. Not everything's in that blog post. So another way to think about increasing your average price, Brooks, is, and we've done this a number of times, we've just eliminated some of our bulk rate options, our bulk prices. We used to sell, believe it or not, an 80-pound ground beef box. We don't do that anymore. And then for a while we sold a 40-pound ground beef box. And just as our pricing and merchandising strategies have changed, we realized those really weren't very valuable items for us to have, and we were offering price discounts for them. So we literally culled and eliminated some of the bulk pricing options. And in a sense, you're increasing your average price when you do that.
Yep.
We also have gone through and we've looked for lower margin products that we're selling. Customers only going to buy so much every time they shop with you. So going through and we used to sell dry goods, yogurts, maple syrup. Brooks used to try to get those in a home delivery box. It was a pain in the butt for logistics.
Double-edged sword because it adds complexity into what we're doing.
Yeah.
Every SKU is another SKU you have to manage, keep in stock, make sure that you're merchandising properly for your margin. And so it's a double-edged sword. Not only do we have low margin on it, but it adds complexity, so more cost to the overall equation.
Exactly. Yeah. So those were just items that we just, not only were those complex items to have, Brooks, they were low margin. So no brainer, get rid of those products. The minute you do that, your average price and margin actually sees a bump. So again, I already mentioned at the beginning, Brooks, just being strategic about where people's customers' sensitivities are. So, think chicken breast versus whole chicken. Think boneless legs versus a bone-in leg.
They're shopping for those every day so they can remember what the pricing is on them. So it's
Yes.
very easy to notice when those goes up, and
Yep.
it's very easy for me to compare to someone else.
Right, exactly. Increasing the price of bison or salmon versus just chicken altogether. Again, chicken's more of a staple item. Bison or salmon is more of a want-to-have type food item. So those are the three tips, Brooks. Increase your yield, lower your input cost, or increase your price. All three ways that can effectively increase your margin. And again, once you get some volume established, just a couple percentage bump up in your overall margin can dramatically increase
Yep.
your end of year profit.
Yep. If you guys can see how these different tips can lead to more profit at the end of the year, let us know in the comments, and let us know which of these three areas that you feel like you need to focus on the most. And be sure to join us for the next week, next episode that comes out, because we're going to be wrapping up this series with the final lever, which is going to be
Turnover. How to increase turnover. So that's always a fun thing to do. When you have your overheads in line, Brooks, and you have your margin in line, then it's let's press on the turnover and get this thing roaring.
Well, it's fun because everybody wants to grow, right? But if you get the first two right first, now you're growing with a sustainable business.
You don't want to grow a bad thing. So once we have overheads and margin in place, then we can grow sustainably.